Hi Martin, welcome to the fourth episode of the Trial to Pay podcast. Welcome.
Hey Rob, thanks for the invite. Good to chat finally.
Yeah, great. Thanks for coming on. So let's just start by, we talked about this a little bit before. If you've got a guiding principle in mind behind how you sort of design and build your products, something that just keeps you moving in the right direction.
Okay, so it's a good question, and I feel like I've got three or four answers, but the simple one for me, I think, is just a sense of the thing I'm working on, is it helping someone?
Yeah.
Is it making someone's life better? It reminds me of, I think it was Richard Branson, and I do not make a habit of quoting him, actually, but he did say something that was quite cool. He said, a business is an idea that simply makes someone's life better. And it kind of stuck with me as being like generally right, I think. Obviously, it also needs to make money and so on and so on, but it resonated with me because I've always felt the same way. Like, I don't want to work on anything that I don't personally believe in. And I think that is quite a challenge for a lot of people like us, people I meet, that, get offered very high paying jobs doing things they don't care about. And I did a lot of that too. And working for myself now is a great opportunity in the sense that I don't need to do that anymore. And I can start with the question, is this something that makes someone's life better? And be honest about that. And sort of a second answer to that, I guess, is just a personal set of virtues behind that of like, if you're an honest person, you have to be honest with yourself first and foremost. And answering that question honestly is hard. Sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is this thing is not making someone's life better. Nobody cares about it except me. I've been through that a few times, and that's why quitting is a good thing sometimes, if you can be honest. I would say that, my answer is pretty much just constantly assessing whether the thing I'm working on is helping someone else. And that comes with a bunch of other things, of course, of trying to figure out how to measure that properly, not quit too soon, also not say anything too long. How do you really answer that question? But yeah, I would say I want to work on things that I know help people and also that help me. That's another big part of that answer, I would say, is working on things for me too.
That's brilliant. I guess also just being, having that contact with your users is part of that, isn't it? And that sort of drives, the kind of desire to build something yourself, build your own product. As opposed to kind of being, I don't know, an engineer in a role where you're kind of like somewhat sort of distanced from all that.
Yeah, for sure. I think starting with like, what do I want to work on? What would help me? What do I like? Build for yourself first, because as everyone said 1,000 times, if you build something for you, chances are you're not a unique person. You're not the only person in the world that likes that thing. It is a different question of like how many other people really are there, and is it a market? Is it viable? But there are definitely people out there that probably like whatever it is that you like. So I think it's a good way to start. But it's also I think maybe people throw words around like lifestyle business and too small and not scalable and it's not going to be a unicorn. I've long since given up on those kinds of ideas anyway. I don't want to build a unicorn. I don't want to build something that's widely interesting to 100 million people. I'm much more interested in what's appealing to 1,000, 2,000 people, because there's a lot of viability in that. There's a lot of freedom in that.
Well, there is so much more nowadays, isn't there? Because you can reach those people. Yeah, love that. Okay, so we're going to be talking about your current product, LangSesh, shortly, which I've had a little look at. And I guess maybe I'd sort of summarize it as a sort of more sort of calmer, more sort of thoughtful, maybe a little bit more grown-up take on the kind of Duolingo sort of concept. That's how it looks like to me, but I'd love to hear it from you shortly, so we'll get into that. But yeah, just first of all, I suppose it would just be good to just dive into your background a little bit. So I suppose a good place to start, as it sounds like you've been coding for a long time, building for a long time, just how you got into that. Was it as a kid or a little bit later on?
Yeah, it was actually. I was actually 11, so it was none of this was really my choice. It was more just the situation, and I do reflect on that a lot and think I was quite lucky to get into something that was, and I didn't know this at 11 years old, but something that was then going to kind of be very important in the world, being able to write code, build things, and all of the things that come with that in terms of how it makes you think. Were very accidentally beneficial when I was quite young. But the very short version of that story is I had an older brother, and he was, I think, 14 at the time, and he was just writing basic code on a Commodore 64. And for anyone who knows what that is, I have to say this nowadays because I'm like, actually, damn, some people have never even seen one. It's a big blue screen with white text, and he was writing code, so it was basically just imagine a blue screen full of white text, and none of it really makes any sense. It's not English. It doesn't look like English. Every single line starts with a 2-digit number or a 3-digit number. And I just remember reading a little bit of it, or trying to. And it's funny, actually, I remember I read the words go sub, which is actually written as one word. In BASIC, it's GOSUB. And I remember trying to read it as English and reading gossip. I said it out loud as gossip, and I said to him, what does that mean? What is gossip? He tried to explain it to me, didn't understand a single word of the explanation. But it sort of, I would say it grew this fascination with, what is this thing? He's writing something that I don't understand. And for all intents and purposes, we're the same person, but he can do this and I can't. And what is this whole like mystic thing? So I just got into it from that point of view. I played around with BASIC myself, started writing little programs in BASIC. I have some silly stories about how I ended up destroying every single entire game that I played as a kid because I wrote password programs at the beginning of each of them that I then couldn't decipher and forgot the password to. But it was all the kind of stuff you would imagine like a kid programmer does. And then, from there I ended up getting involved in more serious programming languages like C, C++, even some reverse engineering and assembler as well. Back when I was pretty young, when I was like 16, 17, right. I was very interested in compiler design, all this low-level stuff that really doesn't have much of a place these days, sadly. But it is definitely an interesting set of skills.
A lot of people talking about C++ and Rust and things like that, on LinkedIn and whatnot nowadays. So presumably there's a fair bit of work going on there.
Yeah, for sure. I think in the games industry, there's definitely more of a potential for that kind of stuff. But the lower level, even just lower level concepts these days. I mean, most people write software that fits into a certain sort of simple box. No one's really writing a new algorithm these days, unless you're in a very, very specific job.
Yeah. We're a lot of layers up, aren't we, these days?
Yeah. Which is a good thing, right? I mean, that's progress, I guess, as well. But I think it is important still to know those principles, and I'm lucky that I know them just because those were the first things I actually learned. But that's how I got into it so long ago.
Yeah, and it's interesting talking about those early computers, Commodore 64s, and I got my first one. I think it was a VIC-20 because I'm a couple of years older than you. It was like a precursor to that. But it's like you turn the thing on and it doesn't do anything unless you put some code in. It's not going to. You can't download games or whatever. And we used to get games on tapes, or you'd even get like a magazine and you'd have to type in the code.
Exactly, I remember doing that as well. Yeah.
But it was more that you kind of start from that position of, it doesn't really do anything unless I solve some problems. So I think that was, for me, I guess, what drew me in, but then also just instilled early on that computers are about, you have to solve problems if you want to make them do things.
That's a really interesting point, because I think we're transitioning into a different kind of world right now where it's not what's the underlying problem, it's what's the request, what do I want out of it, and that's sort of like almost deferred. I'm talking about AI almost in disguise. It does worry me a little bit, the generation of newer engineers that will think that is actually the starting point. There might be someone in 40 years now describing that story as how they got into engineering, and it does worry me what's lost below all of that, because there are still some important concepts there that shouldn't be forgotten. For
sure. Great. And I suppose, so just kind of leading a little bit into your product, LangSesh, which we will get to. Presumably at some point, because you mentioned this, I think in your LinkedIn profile and some of your posts, this interest in languages, as in not computing languages, languages we speak and write. That interest developed at some point and became a passion?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me about that, actually, because it's a funny story in the sense of I didn't care about languages in school. Obviously, we're both from the UK here, so our school education probably was a bit about the same. I think it's still roughly the same even now, where we sort of in the UK get forced to learn some foreign languages, but not that seriously. You usually get forced for a year or two, and you can choose to continue it, but learning a language is a hard thing, and no matter which way around you do it, you realize that, especially as a student, as a 14-year-old making this choice, that's hard. And there's some subjects that are much easier, and you're not in school to have a hard time, so you don't choose them usually. And I did Spanish for 2 years actually in high school, and I had no interest at all in it. It was hard. I didn't care about it. I didn't see any interest in it at all. And I reflect on that with some sadness, because I really wish my Spanish was a lot better now, and it might have been had I been interested in it, but I wasn't. That interest actually developed in uni. I was in uni. It was the second year of uni, so I was 19. That's right. 19. And so for 1 year, I'd had a colleague in uni. He was an older student actually, and he'd served in the British military. And little did I know he'd served in the military and was deployed to Germany. And I didn't know any of this for a whole year of knowing this guy. And then randomly, in one particular moment in a lab somewhere, there was some other students, and they were speaking German, and he just started speaking to them in native level. It wasn't native level, but he spoke the language very fluently. So he just switched into German and spoke, and it blew my mind, because there was this version of this guy that I knew as my friend that I've known for 1 year, and English was there was that connection point. And all of a sudden, there was this different version of this man that I could not understand and follow, and even felt culturally in some way slightly different to me. And I was like blown away by that experience. I was like, wow, that's very much more than a language. I feel like this person's different. I feel like this person's got two persons. I've only got one person, he's got two. And that was the moment, I think, when I was like, wow, German's cool. So I went off learning German for a while. That took me to working in Berlin and then other places in Europe, working for language learning companies, actually, some well-known ones that I won't mention. Yeah, that's definitely where I say reignited. It was never really ignited at all, but that's I think where it started. So
yeah. Do you think it was the way it was taught at school, and perhaps not having that kind of that cultural dimension to it, that just meant that you couldn't see the point in it?
Yeah, my theory is that for Brits living in the UK, maybe this is changing a bit now, but certainly if you go back to when I was in school, which is like 20 years ago or something, no, more, oh God, more. There was no obvious cultural reason to speak Spanish or French or German, and that is the unfortunate truth about most of the language learning industry is something like half of the entire revenue of the entire industry is in education of English for other people, not in some of those English learning another foreign language. So I think that's a big reason, and I think the other reason is as I was mentioning, you're a kid in school, you don't want to take the hard path. So, and you learn pretty quickly that it's not that easy to pass this thing. So I think those are two big reasons. But yeah, similar to the US, I think there's not that strong of a culture of multilingualism like you find in some European, like Switzerland, for example, where it's very normal to speak 4 languages. Yes.
Okay, and so at this point, you know various languages fluently.
I know bits of some, I know more bits of others, and some fluently, yes. But the sad and ironic thing is that I spend much more time building things in this space than I do studying languages. And it's such a hard task to become fluent in a language that's proximate to your own. Actually, stepping back, there's this more general question of like, which is the hardest language to learn, right? Which is one of those questions that's a bit like, which is the hardest programming language? Well, if you're asking someone that currently writes Haskell, then maybe they think another purely functional programming language is the easiest one to learn. So it's very much dependent on where you're at now and what you already know. There is no general answer to that question. But there is actually some bits of documentation research you can find that do measure from the perspective of a monolingual English speaker what's the hardest language to learn. Yeah, like some of those proximate ones are a bit easier to pick up, some of the other ones. So at this point, I think my Vietnamese is okay. I lived in Vietnam for the last year, so a year ago for 1 year. And I chose very actively to learn Vietnamese there because English is, of course, very, very, the level of English is very low in Vietnam. And if you can speak a little bit of Vietnamese and you are living in that place, then it makes a big difference. And there's some other ones, like my German is okay. My Spanish was better, but I haven't studied it for a year and a half now. And I speak another language that maybe some listeners have heard of, but probably not, called Esperanto.
Yes.
Which is a constructed language, which we can get into later if you like.
Well, I was just going to ask about that because you've mentioned it in several places on your profile, and so I'm curious. Tell me about this language.
Okay. So this ties back into the other things quite well, actually. And when I speak to software engineers about Esperanto, there is this additional dimension of interest that I myself experienced. So Esperanto is a constructed language. You could substitute that word for other synonyms like made up, invented, created, like artificial, all of those words. They all work. At the end of the day, it's not spoken by a specific country. It was invented 140 years ago. So actually not that new. 140 years is a long time. It's been spoken pretty much for that entire duration of time. And is still spoken now. There's about, people might not like that I'm going to say this number, but it's only about, I would say, 60,000 fluent speakers of the language across the world. That's not a very big number at all. In fact, that would absolutely be an endangered language if it wasn't for the fact that it's just Esperanto. It's a whole different thing. It's not endangered at all. It's definitely not going to die. People throw around bigger numbers like 200,000, a million, based on Duolingo stats of how many people started the course, which of course is not the same as people learning the language, especially in Duolingo's case. Anyway, I discovered this language because I read about it on Wikipedia, that whole Wikipedia rabbit hole thing that you do sometimes, and you end up learning some random stuff. I found this language, and I just briefly read that it was a constructed language and it was designed to be very, very simple. And at that time, I was in the depths of German grammar. For anyone with any familiarity with German will know that compared to English grammar, German grammar is particularly more difficult. You have to think about a lot more things. The sentence structure can change quite a lot more than English. 3 genders, noun declensions, all these fun things if you're into grammar, but if you're not, terrifying things. I was in the depths of that when I discovered Esperanto, and suddenly it was such a contrast because Esperanto was this language that was redesigned to not have all of those complexities. So my first question was, okay, well, this is not real. It's a bit of a toy thing. It's like hearing about Klingon or Navi or these like languages from TV shows. I kind of thought it was about the same sort of thing, just a hobby project somewhere. And then I ended up going to an event in Wales, actually, where there was 100 people. And I imagined most people would speak in English. And then you'd hear bits of people trying Esperanto, not really speaking it, but maybe trying it. And to my surprise, it was completely opposite. Everyone spoke Esperanto fluently, and nobody spoke any English at all. And I could only say my name and how are you and things like that. But that did definitely ignite this whole idea of like, wow, people really speak this language. People really can reach a level of fluency. At that particular event, people were talking about Bitcoin even, and other subjects the entire day. So yeah, I went back from that event with a sort of slightly different perspective of this is a bold idea. You know, it's taboo to change things like monetary systems and radically change like healthcare and radically change language. Language often never gets changed. There's only a very few number of cases in the world where languages have been dramatically changed. Turkish, Hebrew was revived, but mostly language has been the same for a long time. It evolves very naturally over a very long period of time, but it doesn't get actively changed. Esperanto was this thing from the ground up that was created from nothing. Of course, some things are taken from other languages, some ideas, some root words and things, but for the most part, it's a very unique language to itself. So it's a bold idea, and I really just love bold ideas. Like, if it's taboo, especially, I like it because if people are like, oh no, sounds like a bad idea. My first thought is, okay, so it's new then. It's very new if people think it's a bad idea. So I want to know if there's something in that. So yeah, I went away, played around with it, started going to international events, meeting people. I then, in COVID, moved to Barcelona with my Esperanto for speaking friends for around 6 months. I was there, for about six and a bit months. And that's all I spoke. Again, another reason why my Spanish is not as good as it should be, because actually in Barcelona, where I could have at least improved my Catalan or Spanish, I actually spoke in an invented language with a bunch of people. And yeah, I now speak that language fluently and sometimes dream in it. I have a very large number of friends in that language, and it's pretty crazy. Even here in Asia, I just sometimes meet up with people that are over here and we just hang out, and that's most of those people I've never spoken English to, so it's quite strange to hear them speak English.
Interesting. So, okay, so your initial interest in language sort of sparked, I think you said, was that while you said that was while you were at uni? One of your friends?
It was quite a bit. Oh, sorry, the German, yes.
The German, yeah. So that was sort of with the language, the light bulb one, I kind of, actually languages, so there's an interest there. But then the Esperanto thing, which sounds like, was that sort of part of the moment when you thought, maybe there's something I could build here, something I could go kind of deep on? And did that happen? Did you come across Esperanto? Because we haven't really talked about any of your kind of roles after uni, but was that something that came along the road when you were out there so building your career?
Yeah, so I think that happened. It didn't happen that long ago, actually. I've only been speaking Esperanto for about 7 years.
Okay.
7 years, so 8 years ago, I couldn't speak a word of it, hadn't heard of it. The German thing, of course, was just after uni. Yeah. So in between then was this gradual interest in language. And eventually Esperanto arrives on the scene as a cool idea. But in the meantime, I started to learn Russian, Hebrew, Turkish, some other random languages. And it sort of grew out of that first experience for sure. And yeah, I mean, it's like any hobby, right? Like when you really get into something, because I've had this with other things too, like the gym. I also am a big fan of the gym, and you spend time in these environments and you understand people, you see how people behave and what's important to them and how they do things. And as much as that applies to language, it applies to the gym, it applies to any situation that you actually like really put yourself in and you can't help but see. So yeah, for sure, that's when I started to think about, I would say add to that the fact that I was also at that around about that same time, I was working for another language learning company in Berlin as well. So I was also seeing from the inside like how a product is built, how they market that, the kinds of problems that they deal with in trying to grow that business. And it did go from a startup to a very successful language learning business that pretty much any language learner has probably used at this point. So yeah, I think both of those combined, and eventually, I'm sure it'll resonate with you very, very strongly, is as an engineer, if you spend a long time in a field working for somebody else, you eventually, once you've seen the whole business though, you see how the sausage is made. You're like, I can make this sausage on my own. And more than that, I can make a very, exactly. I can make a much better sausage, or a very specific sausage for this specific group of people that will really like me if I do that.
You see the things they're not doing, the different angles that they're just sort of ignoring because they're a big company and they've just, gotten complacent. Exactly. So I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, but I guess over the kind of years, obviously you had this kind of language interest developing. You've gone to uni, you went and sort of built a successful career in software engineering. Were you sort of building side projects along the way? Did you always have that kind of entrepreneurial bug?
Yeah, so I'm gonna strike from that sentence the word entrepreneurial, because again, it is virtually being honest, I don't think I was entrepreneurial for a very long time actually. I was just creative. I was very interested in building things and helping people, but I wasn't interested in the money side of things. And maybe that was a bit of a privilege because I was working in an industry where I could always find jobs if I needed them. And I've sort of done that a lot. I've been in and out of like, okay, I'm working full time right now because I need to. And as soon as I don't need to, then I'm much more interested in being able to take this solo route. But yeah, until very recently, I would say recently, until maybe 5-6 years ago, I wouldn't have put the entrepreneurial word onto that. At times I would call them startups, but they honestly weren't, because they weren't, none of these ideas started as, how do I make a profitable business? That wasn't the question. The question again was how do I make something that people like? And there's lots of art in the world, and there's lots of hobby projects and side projects and communities and grassroots events and open source that people like, and it helps them, but it's not a business. So yeah, I did a lot of that, and I've done that since the very beginning. Even going right back to when I was like 12, 13 years old. I have projects there that I do reflect on some of those and think that's kind of like an early version of GitHub. That's an early version of this. Now, we've all built things that were way ahead of its time. In truth, would never have ever become a successful company anyway. But all of that kind of stuff. I built like a 3D. Well, it wasn't 3D. It was 2-dimensional but isometric game essentially to teach my friends C, where it was like a classroom in a little house. You could walk around and chat to people, and then you could go into the little auditorium, and then I would walk up on a stage. Literally, you would see it as little isometric 2D characters, and then I had a little whiteboard, and you had little commands to write on the whiteboard, and I would teach my friends C, which was basically what I did. I learned C from these guys in this chat when I was younger. So yeah, I've done so many projects and worked in so many different fields as more just a hobby for me to learn about the technology, for me to play around with it and build something that I think is useful. And there's so many examples of that stuff across loads of different domains, actually. Great way to learn.
Yeah, and absolutely. And is LangSesh your first kind of business that spun out of one of these side projects?
There's been a few things. If I go way back, I did something in mobile that was capturing statistics about the way people use their mobile phones. This was a long time ago, maybe 10 years ago. I sold that. It wasn't for a huge amount of money, but that was the first official commercial thing that I did on my own. And I think maybe that was where I thought, okay, yeah, people will buy software. And actually, here's a side point I want to make as well, actually. I think I see this with a lot of people in, say, my and your and our generation of engineers. We grew up on an internet where you couldn't really pay for things initially. And then we grew up in an internet where it wasn't really very common or popular to sell things on the internet. And now we're in a point where everyone buys things. And it's hard to sort of sometimes remind yourself that is the internet we work in now. Sometimes I think I've carried that forward and thought, people are not going to buy this. And then you see what people really do buy. And there really is a lot of commerce on the internet. People do buy things. People do buy apps. But it took me a long time to really convince myself that I could build something that someone would pay for. But that was probably the first one. And maybe that's going back 10 years now. And then since then, I got involved in some startups with some friends, and we did pretty well. But we did the whole startup journey where it was like build hype and not value. And we got a lot of interest. There was a good story, some crazy stories, fake investors that never existed, big investigations that led to people that it turns out that it was someone screwing us over, and all these crazy stories. But none of those things were really successful in the way that they were meant to be. And then language comes onto the scene probably about 7-8 years ago, when just after leaving the company that I was working at, I thought, okay, I want to try and create my own value in this domain, in the domain that really interests me as a hobby, as a subject. And I have some ideas about now. And then I worked on a product called Yak, actually. And anyone that knows me that maybe listens to this will think, oh yeah, you've been working on that for 10 years. In name I have, but it's actually been 3 different variations of an idea. It's just the same brand, because it doesn't matter. In my mind, it's the same goal, which is to make someone's life better who is aiming to learn a new language. And there was 3 variations of that app that were very different to each other. One was an iOS app that was based on just tiny conversational practice. The other was some kind of marketplace where people could sell tuition skills to people who wanted to learn language, and there would be some clever match. And then the more recent incarnation was like digital interactive online books. And I've been working on Yak actually until about 6 months ago. 6 months ago was the point where I sort of pivoted away from Yak and went into LangSesh. They're not that different, but then they are. It depends to what level we discuss it, but they're both language learning products. Yak is out there, it's been out there for a while. But the mistake I made with Yak, and again, very recent mistake, is just not thinking about the business model really too much at all.
Yeah.
Thinking if I create something that's valuable that people like, then the money can come afterwards. I mean, I think there are cases where that happens, but there's this little bit in the middle no one talks about, which is someone at some point said, okay, it's useful, but for it to be useful and profitable, it has to be in this shape. And sometimes there's no shape. You know, I remember hearing a great talk from the guy that ran 4chan. He did a talk years ago, and he stood up on the stage and said, look, I had 10 million active users, and I couldn't get a single one of them to pay me money. Yeah. I was like, yeah, you know, you've got users you can convert into profit is like a nice idea, and in some cases is definitely true, but it's not true by definition. It's only true if you can do that, and there are cases where you definitely can't. Another risk of like freemium, and I did that as well, a lot of freemium of like, just put it out there, just get users, just validate the value, and later you can get the money in. So Yak was another case of that, of like not thinking about the business model and then arriving at a point where it's a cool product and I got a lot of great feedback about it, learned a lot from it in terms of what people like, and even what people will pay for. But I built a business that was sort of a bit of a scalp. It's like the cost of acquisition of a user plus the cost of production of the thing that they want to buy, because I'm selling content. So in other words, the content production cost plus the cost of acquisition of user was so close to the amount of money you could make off this thing that the only way that business works is at scale. And I didn't want to build a business that can only work at scale.
Okay, yeah. And so, but Yak's still alive, isn't it? You're still running it.
It is. It's still alive, and there's still this potential for it somewhere down the line. But I think honestly, I'm just going through that process of seeing whether this pivot makes sense, and if it does, I'll probably direct all my attention to that. In all honesty, I've not worked on Yak for about 8-9 months now, and I don't intend to go back to it unless there's some big reason to do that. And like I say, I don't think that's going to happen, because the conclusion for me is that, you know, when you think about business model, if you put yourself in a situation where the only way to scale it is to pull a lever of capital and say, if you inject capital into this, then we could go bigger. But it's a bigger risk too, because if we can make those sales at that scale, this capital just gets burned. I'm not sure I really want to play that game. I want a bigger answer to the question: is this valuable to people right now? And Yak was also a pre-AI product, so there was this big transition there as well of like AI and language learning, of course, have a very, very close connection there. And it feels like that you can, like in many business domains now, small teams of people with AI can do a lot more than they could ever do before. So yeah, that plays into it to us. Yeah,
okay. So the language company that you worked at, that wasn't your most recent role, was it, before you decided, because obviously now you're traveling and doing this sort of the digital nomad thing. So even though you developed the interest in the language company, that wasn't the point where you decided, right, I'm going to go for it then. It just, the timing wasn't quite right? Or the idea hadn't quite sort of come together in your mind as to what you wanted to build?
So right after leaving that company, I did start to work on Yak, let's say Yak iteration or incarnation 1, and then later 2 and 3. And in between doing that, I was bootstrapping that. I didn't go for funding on that one. At that point, I'd realized I want to try and build something on my own terms. So I was bootstrapping. I was in and out of work in order to fund the lifestyle of working on that thing. But I was making a lot of mistakes and taking a long time. And one of the biggest lessons from that whole experience was that I was moving far too slowly and didn't think it was a problem. And it was a problem because I just wasn't learning quickly enough. It took me many months, maybe over a year, to get something out there to begin with. So I'm learning too slowly at that point. But you know, this is one of the eternal problems with engineers turned startup people, entrepreneurs, let's say, is that there's so much joy in the building that you can easily distract yourself from the reality of you're not here to build. Build is a part of it for sure, but it's not the only part of it. But you get so much joy and so much creativity and so much freedom and out of that part as an engineer that you can really just mislead yourself. And I did that a lot in that time. So yeah, to answer the question, I did that almost straight afterwards, about a year afterwards. But while working for various different other companies at the time, I got into a lot of educational stuff. So a lot of mentorship, helping newer engineers. And then eventually my latest role was engineering manager at a big company in London for about 80 engineers. Again, not a role I particularly enjoyed because I think it's a hands-off role. You switch engineering problems for people problems and realize, engineering problems are not so bad.
No, okay. So at what point was it then that you decided to make the change that you have? Because you're out in Vietnam at the moment, did you say?
I'm in Thailand right now.
Thailand, yeah, right, okay. But you've moved around a little bit, haven't you, since you left?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was the impetus that sort of led to that quite big decision? And how did you make it work, sort of financially and everything else?
Okay, so if we go back about 3 years, my girlfriend and I both had the same sort of idea. She's pursuing the same path as I am. Actually, we're doing it in parallel in entirely different businesses and sectors, but both doing it together. The plan was let's make enough runway for ourselves. So we sometimes jokingly refer to it as raising our own seed round, because the cost of this kind of stuff is so low. And when I say that, sorry, let me clarify specifically what I mean. Building is not expensive. It used to be. I remember days where I'd have to hire servers at $200 a month, that kind of stuff was expensive just on the basis of that alone, let alone all the other things you would need. Then you would hire a designer maybe, or a UX engineer, or these days, a lot of those skills have sort of become simpler through frameworks, patterns, and actually a lot of full stack engineers can do a lot of that stuff on their own. So we're at that point now where the building part of it isn't actually the expensive part. It may be the time-consuming part, depending on what you're doing. If you're building a game, for example, it takes a long time anyway. But the building part is very there. It's accessible. The expensive part of taking that route of I'm going to build my own thing is that life is expensive, right? If you live anywhere in the UK at this point, rent's way more than it used to be 10 years ago, and utility costs are way more, and food and everything. Life's just expensive in the Western world. And we kind of have to mostly go work on things we don't want to work on to pay for that bit. It's not really to enable the building anymore, because we can definitely do that bit. It's to free up the time and then pay for life. So we both basically decided, okay, if we can't raise money from someone else, which is a bad idea, let's not do that. If we just save money and then pull the other lever instead, pull the cost lever way down, it's sort of like the personal equivalent of letting go of 50% of your staff to improve your P&L, right? It's like the personal version of that. It's like if we don't have to pay for an expensive apartment, and we don't go and have an expensive wedding, and instead we go and live in Vietnam where the cost of living is a lot cheaper, then we buy that time back, and then we have a real chance to do something. Because as much as people talk about 5-6K MRR, and you've had some great stories on your podcast actually, those are the exceptions. There's many more people trying to reach that level and not doing it in 52 days. As much as those stories are incredibly motivating and inspiring, I think it's better to go into it with a bit of a more realistic viewpoint and think, well, maybe it's going to take me a year, and I already know my own history is a slow one. So that's what we did. We decided, okay, let's save. So we worked for around a year in the UK and just saved every single penny we could. And then we decided to move to Asia, and we came out to Vietnam originally. The simple reason was just because Vietnam's got just the right amount of infrastructure for it not to be too much of a developing country compared to some neighboring countries you might go to instead, but also is not so developed that it's basically like switching one problem and getting the same one back on the other side. Living in Bangkok, for example, actually that is still much cheaper, but it's not as cheap as Vietnam. So yeah, we moved to Vietnam, and then we've been here for basically almost 2 years now, living the lifestyle over here, and there's been a huge surprising set of results from just doing that alone, actually. But the main reason was to buy ourselves the time, and that's what we've been doing for the last year and a half, is just pursuing our own ideas and trying to learn and find that founder and product market fit at the same time.
Absolutely. So are you, at this point, although we need to get into LangSesh and some of the details there, but are you still living off savings? Have you got kind of is there a runway to what you're doing where you need to kind of hit a certain MRR to be able to sustain what you're doing there?
Yeah, we both have, so we combine our efforts, and I would say we're about 40% of where we need to be for this to be sustainable. Yeah. So we're not at sustainability yet, but getting to 40%, and getting to anything that's above zero is a huge thing. Because it's just so hard to not get there, and I've done that so much before. So we're getting closer for sure, but we're mostly still living off what we've saved to do this. So not a glamorous reality, and I think that's a really important message. Is you can do this, but it's a sacrifice. It's not easy. It's not a privilege. You choose not to do the other things. You can do this thing, and it may not work. But yeah, we both pick up jobs here and there when we need to sort of top up the money that we've got. So we could make it sustainable that way by doing the thing we don't want to do. So that's a good situation to be in. But yeah, we're both seeing some early revenue now, which is great. But it feels like it's still going to take some time because, you just don't get it right the first, the second, the third time. The more iterations, the better. And the reality is we're still at sort of like single digit iterations here. So I'm not expecting to find that long tail hockey stick ramp up just yet. And that's good. And it's nice to be honest about that. It's nice to go into it naturally and say, okay, I'm going to put the time in though. And I'm going to put the effort in to make sure that the iteration cycle improves, speeds up, the learning is there, and we're in it for the long haul. So that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess briefly, you're enjoying life out there. You'd recommend it?
Yeah, I mean, I'd recommend it for people who already think that they might like it. I mean, it's definitely, it comes with downsides too, right? Like, I write about this on LinkedIn a bit actually, because for me it's quite a powerful subject, but it's lonely, especially when you say, I'm not going to raise money and therefore we're not going down this, this route of make the company look bigger every year by hiring more people. It's definitely almost like the polar opposite. It's like we're keeping costs low, and that mostly means I'm working on my own. I do have some communities of friends, and that does help, and you need that soundboard sometimes, but it's not the default. And having worked in lots of incredible teams with people that are far smarter than me and incredibly motivating, it is definitely a downgrade from that, just in terms of how you feel, in terms of the kinds of sort of creativity and ideas, problem solving that comes out of having those people around you to bounce ideas off and stuff. So that's the downside. And then there's a bit of a downside in terms of personal responsibility as well, because you're out here on your own too. So you've given up a lot of the network and a lot of the infrastructure, social infrastructure, let's call it, at home, that sort of happened by accident because you grew up there and you've got friends from school and from ex-colleagues and just, the proximity and all that stuff. When you give all that up, you have to sort of rebuild it, or of course have a very, very lonely life, which I would not recommend. So, but one of the surprising things about that is that it's actually very easy to do that here. I didn't really know this until I came here, and it actually totally makes sense when you think about it, is that it's a self-selected bubble of people that are all doing the same thing. So it's like when you talk about Haskell, you also probably find quite a lot of mathematicians, or when you talk about Esperanto, you find people who are really interested in languages, because it's a selection criteria already. It filters the set of possible people it could be down to a much more niche set of people. And when you come over here, you go to like Nomad meetups, or you go to, there's a lot of indie hacker sort of SaaS meetups here as well. And you meet a bunch of people doing the same thing. They've taken exactly the same route. They've left their home country. They're in a new one. They're probably learning the local language. They've been here for a few years. They're making a little bit of revenue. They found a way to make it work. And they really want to connect. They really want to make friends. So I found making friends over here actually really surprisingly easy. So there are definitely, there are downsides, upsides. I would say just, there's a lot of quotes about this, like having a second language gives you a second soul and those sorts of things. I think real travel does that as well. Real travel being actually living in a place, not just being there, like integrating into it and, living in the places. Like some of the places we've lived in Vietnam especially are certainly eye-opening. They're not the same life that you're used to in the West. But it's fun for sure. Yeah,
I mean, the photos I keep seeing pop up in your feed are amazing.
Yeah, well, it's like, but bear in mind, it's just like any Instagram, those are the moments, the one moment in the day where you're like, damn, that's a really incredible sunset. But it was raining half an hour ago and I didn't take a picture of that, so.
Great. So what's kind of your, I guess your kind of medium to long-term plans there? Do you think it's probably not going to be forever? It's just a great experience for now, or what are your thoughts?
It's a good question. I think it's really important to stay open-minded about these things. Like, I meet a lot of people out here that absolutely have already decided that they will not go back to the UK because the economics don't work for them. And I get that, and I sort of feel a little bit of that myself too. I will actually be back in the UK at the end of the year for a few months, and I have no plan for that. So it's nice to have no plan. That's one thing. Another thing you have to embrace, I think, in this lifestyle is not really knowing what's going to be next and being okay with it. I mean, I say this lifestyle, you could take that to mean the world of business or the world of travel, because they're very similar in that sense. You really don't know what's coming next or what you're going to decide. But I think it's probably likely, and it wouldn't surprise anyone, I don't think, that knows me, to find that I'll probably be back in Thailand or in Bangkok at some point. I think Thailand is a perfect country for the balance of cost, culture, and and the sort of mix, the sort of the international mix of people that you get in a place like that. It's an incredible city. So I would like to be there. But yeah, it depends on so many things.
Absolutely. Okay, great. All right, let's dig into LangSesh a little bit more then. So
cool.
If I could just start by asking you, I guess, if I don't have the first clue what it is, what is it and sort of what does it do?
Okay, elevator pitch time, 10 seconds ago. So it's a tool. I describe it as a tool right now. It's a tool to help people who want to learn a language. And it's aimed at people who are, I would say, ideally slightly beyond complete beginner, although I'm trying to address that because I think it would be helpful if that wasn't true. But right now, in the form that anyone listening to this second, for example, would see, slightly post-beginner, but absolutely not post-intermediate. So it's that gap in the middle of, let's just for simplicity's sake say beginner to, if anyone knows the official names, I'm talking about basically to about B1 level, which is a weak intermediate level. Beyond that, I think apps have a very diminishing returns, because once you reach that level of any language, the best thing you can be doing is probably watching TV, meeting people, talking to them. Even any form of real immersion is going to be better than some form of synthetic immersion via an app or via a book or anything like that you consume. So it's a tool that helps people learn language, and the way that it does that right now is it generates different kinds of exercises. Right now, only reading. The plan is to go into audio very, very soon as well, or listening and reading are both very important skills. In fact, listening particularly so. And it generates small exercises where people are encouraged to read them and then complete a series of challenges based on comprehension of that reading exercise. So for absolute beginners, this is a great way to learn a language, is see the real language used. Other apps have the problem of here's a random sentence. Duolingo famously did this for many, many years. Here's a random sentence. What does it mean? There's some stupid, usually something to do with having a bear or a tiger eating your grandma or something like that. Really, not very useful phrases. The LangSesh goes one step further in the sense that it's saying, here's an actual story, a very short story that you're meant to read as a basically a beginner, and maybe you won't understand the whole thing, but through the exercises that follow, you'll decompose the sentence into its pieces, deconstruct it into its pieces, and actually start to see connections between the relevancy between certain words, certain grammar, and things like that. It's not in its final form yet. LangSesh is an MVP, and of course, an MVP as an experiment is, you think it's viable. You even think it's minimal. It's probably not even as minimal as you think. That's another lesson from recently as well. So I put out LangSesh, and I would say it was like MVP iteration 1. And what I've learned is that it can be more minimal, and version 2 is more minimal. And in terms of viability, in some senses, it hit a little bit of that. I've got a lot of great feedback from people about how it works and the experience that it gives them. But in other ways, it's not viable because people are not using it regularly. People are not coming back and using it again and again. There is a drop-off. And that's not ideal. And there's a big question of why. That's what LangSesh is. To answer the question, that's what LangSesh is. It's a tool that generates short reading exercises and challenges off the back of them. And then it has a little bit of gamification in there to show you where you've come from, like how many words you've learned, how much time you spent studying, and 1 or 2 more gamified elements like streaks. Streaks actually in LangSesh are a little carefully designed not to be sort of the painful streak that you get elsewhere when you will learn for 30 days, then you lose it, and then you think, I'm not going to do any more now because I've just lost 30 days. It's ironic because it sort of motivates you until it doesn't, and then it demotivates you exactly to the degree that you were motivated, but in reverse, because you're like, I've just lost this thing, I feel terrible. Of course, Duolingo commercialized that and started selling it back to you, but I'm not going to do that because, going back to the virtue of the beginning of the conversation, this is not an honest thing to do. No. But what LangSesh does with streaks is it actually shows you your best streak. So it's like a PB in the gym. If one day you went in the gym and you deadlifted 200 kilograms, that will always be true. Always. Every time you go in the gym, you can celebrate that you were able to deadlift 200 kilograms at some point. Now, if you ever beat it, great. But if you don't, that was still your best. So streaks work a little bit like that in LangSesh. But yeah, that's what the current product is that's live now. I've been in the depths of iteration 2 for the last 2-3 weeks.
So, because I had a little play with it. Learning sort of foreign languages isn't really my world right now, but I had a little play, and I've obviously used Duolingo before, so I was sort of very aware of the difference, I suppose, between the two. Like I say, your product just felt a lot calmer. It didn't have loads of gimmicks going on and kind of crazy animations and sounds and stuff. And it seems like, so it's trying to draw you in by you sit down and you choose some settings in terms of the language you want to learn, and then it's session based. Is that the idea? You sort of say you're going to do a few minutes, sort of commit to doing a few minutes of practice.
Exactly. Yeah. The name LangSesh is sort of like a bit of a nod to that. It's like, it's just a quick session to practice the language. That's it. And the value proposition right now is just turn 3 minutes into some language learning progress. But I'm sort of shifting away from that. As you mentioned, at the moment, it does feel quite minimal, and I'm quite happy with the UX, but there are bits of it that I'm not happy with. And in spite of trying to make it as minimal as possible, for example, with LangSesh, you don't need to sign in. You don't need to do anything. You can actually click one button and just immediately use the value. The value is right there. It's behind one button. It has to be one button because you might not. I can't assume which language you want to learn. So I've put a lot of effort into making this work without you having to do anything. Nevertheless, there's this whole section where you're like, well, you can change the language, you can see the exercise types that are coming but not implemented right now, you can choose the difficulty level, and the subject that you talk about, or rather that you read about, is chosen randomly based on some emojis. So it's sort of like a one of those sort of like fruit machines that spins 3 emojis and it picks 3 random things, and then that's what the subject that you read about is based on. Now, this is random, and this is kind of one of the complaints thrown around with Duolingo, and it's fair to throw it around with LangSesh right now, which is, I don't want to talk about random things. I probably have a more specific goal. Like if I'm learning Spanish to go on holiday, I probably want to order a beer. I want to learn cerveza and how to, or say, can you give me 1, or can you give me 3 or 4 or 5? Certain numbers, certain expressions, those are going to be important to a certain context. And that is not being captured right now. And that's why I described it originally as a tool. It's a tool that was sort of an experiment of like leveraging AI carefully in the background to produce these reading exercises based on these parameters. Does it work? Can it produce good language? Can it produce language that's constrained in specific ways based on the difficulty levels? I think I've learned from that yes, there's a lot of potential there, but the product has not productized that very well right now, and that's shifting to a course structure now. The problem with LangSesh at the moment is that people don't know how to continue to use it effectively because it's just a tool. It's like if you give someone Git and you say, go ahead and use Git well. It's like, well, I need to learn the patterns first. I need to know how to use this thing. LangSesh is a little bit too much like that and a little less like, okay, you're a beginner. We know who you are. We know how to help you right now. This is how we're going to help you. And this is where you are right now. This is the direction you need to head, and that's where you're going to go. So there's not enough structure right now. That's the big lesson from speaking to everyone that's used.
Makes sense. I think you're learning a new language. You want that kind of roadmap, don't you? You've got to get from A to B, and this is how it's going to go to get you there. Yeah. Which I feel like Duolingo does to an extent when I've used it in the past. But as you say, it's a bit chaotic. That's what it feels like. You don't really know where you are. You're kind of going through this kind of fake world of whatever it is, getting the I can't remember, getting the badges or whatever, and it's just So I also like what you're doing with you're sort of saying, okay, I'm going to commit to doing however many minutes practice, and that's what I'm saying. It's not this kind of like, well, we're going to try and just keep you on the app all day, and get you into this kind of really addictive loop. It's like you want a little bit of that. Maybe you want people to come back the next day, but getting them into this strange state where it's like ba-ding, ba-ding, ba-ding.
Right.
It's like, is that
the gamification thing is like, it's overdone in Duolingo for sure. I'll give Duolingo credit for great UX for people who are very, very casual. They maybe don't even want to learn language. They just want to do something that's different from doom scrolling Instagram. In which case, Duolingo's way better at spending your time than doom scrolling Instagram is. But it is still, I think, on that side of the spectrum of like, it's much more of an entertainment approach. And I am trying to be definitely aiming at more serious actual acquisition, because again, going back to my original point, I'm building this for me. So right now I'm learning Indonesian, and I want to use LangSesh to help me get better at saying basic things in Indonesian, but that definitely requires structure, because I come straight back to the question of, okay, what do I know now? What do I need to know from here to progress properly? I can't just jump to certain constructs and certain parts of the language because I'm not ready for that yet. And that course structure is kind of what Yak was, because those were books. Those are very curated, expensive to produce resources. This is a similar thing, but the cost of production of that content is a lot less, because it can be generatively produced following various different guidelines of like what a course structure should look like for Spanish A1 or German B1 and that kind of stuff. So, and then one other thing I'd just like to mention as well is pricing. So another big lesson from this first iteration, this first MVP experiment, was that the pricing model was completely wrong. So if you looked at LangSesh recently, you'll see now that it's monthly. It has a monthly offer, but it didn't have that 2 weeks ago. So the version that most people used and most of the feedback came from was a version that used credit system instead. And this is a common thing with AI products because as the business owner, of course, you are metered on your usage. If you fire a bunch of API requests to some model, let's say it 10x's overnight, then you're going to pay 10x more. So it kind of makes sense to build a cost structure for the consumer that at least mirrors that. And then, one power user doesn't take away the profit of 3 moderate users, let's say. The problem with that, though, is again, if you think about the user, they don't care about that. They don't care that it's metered like that. That's your problem. So I made the mistake of going down this credit route. And yeah, I was offering people like, okay, you can buy this many credits, this many credits, this many credits. And there's just too many buying decisions at this point. People are like, what do I need credits for? And once I figure that out, how many do I need? And should I buy more now so I don't have to keep buying them every month? And best case scenario, some people did buy credits and it was cool to see that. But best case scenario, those people would be presented with another buying question. Like as soon as they were out, they have to buy again and buy again and buy again. Nobody wants to do that. It was also too expensive. The business model itself was just pricing this too high. So moving to a monthly model, I think, is the right move, but not until the product is also right. So yeah, structured learning and pricing are the two big takeaways right now.
We touched on exactly the same issue actually in the last episode, and the founder came to exactly the same realization because everyone's pushing this idea of usage-based pricing. It's great for you, right? But I mean, from the user's point of view, it's a real turn-off. And actually, I was just thinking now about like ChatGPT as an example. So I know I'm on their pro for that. I don't know, it's like $20 a month or something. But if it was, I had to buy credits and it was X whatever cent per prompt, I wouldn't sign up. You just stay on the free. You just wouldn't, because I don't know. Like I don't know. I mean, I'm asking it stuff all day, but I don't know how much that's going to cost me. It just doesn't make sense.
Right? No. It needs to be there and just be like useful. You don't think about it. And I think for that reason, the pricing model has to be on the monthly side, has to be right, because if it's too expensive, then people are going to be like, well, do I use it enough to justify this price? But LangSesh is now priced at $7 a month. So I think it's at that point now where it's cheaper than most other language learning things you'll use. And if I can show you more value than I can currently show you, which I'm confident about in the next iteration, then hopefully that's as an overall picture, that's a much bigger offer for people. It's an offer that hopefully is a lot less easy to refuse. But we'll see. This is the great thing about this whole world, right? Is that we build an experiment and we try and we see what happens.
Yep. Okay. So in terms of how you came up with the idea, obviously we can kind of get a rough sense from that on the basis of your interest in languages, the Yak sort of story. But I guess what was the kind of moment of realization that something like LangSesh was the way to go with all this? That
came out of pursuing this product that I was working on just prior to this, Yak. I worked for a very long time on that product. The last iteration of that was about a 2-year project. It's way too big. It's full of all of the mistakes. If anyone wants to talk to me about all the mistakes to try and avoid, that is a perfect source of all of them. It has way too many features. It has way too much supposed value in there. And it was such a complex product that when it was launched, most people didn't give me much feedback about it because there was just too much in there. And so another lesson for me is launch the simple thing, not necessarily only because you can do that quicker, but when people see a simple thing, when they see a page that's got 2 things on it, they're much more likely to tell you, what about this? Or you could do this different, because they can already understand the whole thing. So they're empowered to, with the full understanding of what the thing is, give you their ideas about what it could do instead. But the second you present something that's so refined, I worked for a company actually once that did this. They acquired another company in the exact same domain as them. I'm trying to anonymize this sufficiently. And the business they acquired was it was the Asian version of the thing. And it was actually, from a UX point of view, terrible, absolutely terrible. And the Western version, the Western company that acquired this Asian company and brought it under the umbrella of the big company, of course thought, well, we need to unify this experience. We can't have 2 things that look completely different under the same brand. So they improved the UX so much that they lost the entire customer base. And it's one of those interesting things of maybe people actually liked the really bad UX because it signaled to them that it was cheaper. And that's why they went there, because they thought they were going to get the cheaper prices from the crappy UX. And now all you've done is you've signaled that this isn't a really expensive Western alternative now, and they're going to go look for the cheap one again that doesn't exist anymore. So That with Yak, I learned that lesson. I almost did that same thing. It was like, here's the big refined product with like 18 features and all these things. And very few people had much to say about it, probably because they didn't have the time to really sit and think and understand it. But to answer your question, when Yak launched and I started to get feedback and think, okay, what's the next step here to turn this into a profitable business? Again, asking that question far too late. The answer was, find a way to produce this level of content at this quality, curated language learning content. This is as good as like taking any successful language learning book off a shelf in a bookstore and saying, how do we recreate this more cheaply? Maybe there isn't a way to answer that. Maybe there's no answer. Maybe that is actually the lowest. It's already raced to the bottom. That book is already at $10. You're not making it any cheaper than that. Yak had that problem, and so that happened around the exact same time that AI was really just present everywhere. It was suddenly capable of doing so many things. The transformer architecture had boomed into these huge big LLMs with intensely massive amounts of parameters that suddenly could accidentally speak every language, and it became clear that there was an opportunity here potentially for some kind of entry-level learning app to have content generated, not produced by a human, but generated. Now, some people said to me, why not use AI to just produce the books for Yak then? That's not possible for the same reason that go and ask ChatGPT to write the next iteration of Harry Potter, and it's probably going to be really, really bad. That's exactly the same reason that's not going to work in Yak too, because these are books of like 50, 80 pages with a very, very structured approach that really someone who's gone through the processes understands, but an LLM is not going to be able to do that consistently. So LangSesh was really just, okay, if you basically took Yak and simplified it back down to its essence, but the exercises that people could do again and again and again were generated, would that work? In other words, the hypothesis is LLMs are one of the most incredible tools for language. They are language tools. An LLM is a language model. It's a model for language. It's the exact perfect resource or capability that never existed before that aligns so perfectly with much of early language learning. If you're learning Spanish right now and you go and sit in ChatGPT and you say, okay, tell me how to say hello. Okay, actually I'm in Argentina. Tell me how to say in Argentina. Okay, I've said hello. I want to say how are you? And then you say, okay, what does that exactly mean? Like break that down into individual words so I can memorize it better. Like what am I actually asking here? Am I asking how's it going? Am I asking how are you feeling? In an Asian language, you'll realize that actually probably means what did you eat? And you can sit in ChatGPT and get all of this. You can say, okay, here's the sentence I think I can say. Is it right? And it'll accurately tell you in almost all cases, no or yes. And then it'll break down what's wrong. This capability is incredible. We've never had this before because modeling language is impossible until now. And now we did it by accident, which is insane to think about. But it breaks down at the higher level, like it does with coding, like it does with many things. At the very top level, the context is just too nuanced and it does not fit the training set. So we get this disconnect where the result from the LLM doesn't match quite what you wanted because you now want something that's much more nuanced and specific. That happens with language too. But there's definitely room for products in the way before that point for these beginner learners, intermediate learners that can absolutely produce good content that people can consume when it's not important that you read in the news or watching a Netflix show because actually you can only say 5 things in the language and what you're trying to do is learn 10. It can produce that kind of content. So yeah, it came out of that. It was like Yak is in this horrible position where it's very expensive to probably like churn this machine and try and make profit. There's this opportunity over here that employs AI and it sort of changes the product so much that it is definitely a pivot. It's not something that you can sort of shoehorn into the same approach. And that's exactly what I'm pursuing now with LangSesh.
Yep. And did you go through a process of validating the idea in some way before you started charging for it, before you even had the kind of fully refined product, to even just check that you're kind of on the right track, whether this idea in your mind even makes sense to anyone?
Yeah, I don't have a great answer to this really. I wish I could say, yes, I validated it perfectly, but I just don't think that's binary. I think you can have a conviction about something, and I think when you build for yourself, you're part of that as well. So I would say initially it was just simply, as a language learner, this would be really cool if it could do all these things. And I had this idea in my head of, if it could do these things, it would definitely help me. It would help me right now with Indonesian. And it's basically what I was already doing with these LLMs. It's just productizing it and putting it into like a much nicer UX. You could do this thing directly with a model if you want to. It just wouldn't feel as nice. So I was convinced that the capability is there. What I wasn't convinced is whether people will buy a productized version of it at the cost that I will offer it. And I've always, actually, you're a great example of, I'm seeing your post on LinkedIn a lot. And I like that you just say what I'm thinking a lot of the time. And it's almost the controversial, taboo, too simple thing, but sometimes it resonates with me as being, that's true. And this idea of, building the landing page and saying, would you pay for this thing? Is kind of useless. Like, what do they even imagine that you're selling them potentially? Because you don't even know. So how are they going to know? And what you write on that landing page is probably going to change. So I just think sometimes the best thing to do is actually answer a different question, which is how can I just give them something quicker?
Yes.
And that's what I tried to do. So LangSesh was about 4 months of work. Again, quite slow, but way less slow than the 2 years prior with Yak. And I just put that out there, and I learned a lot from that. And I think I've learned more from that than any other kind of attempt at validation. But that is with the context of, I did speak to a lot of language learning friends. I'm very active in a lot of communities thanks to Esperanto, and everyone basically said to me, this is a cool idea. But I take that with a pinch of salt, because I'm like, yeah, I think it's a cool idea too, but what's it going to look and feel like, and how is it going to specifically make you better at this language? Like those are the details. Those are the things that you can only answer by doing them.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people sort of get a little bit scared off by this word validation, and maybe we need to do something about that, because I think it's more about just, trying to involve people like you who have the same problem as you as early on as possible, and just seeing if, just to check if it's just not just you, and also, to get their early insights that are going to help you sort of shape the product and get you to, an MVP that actually you can go somewhere with.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it sounds like you were talking to other people who were interested in languages and wanted to learn when you were sort of building.
Yeah. I hesitate to say validation just because I don't want to be like, yes, I did a lean startup canvas and then I did this and that. I didn't do any of that stuff. I just spoke. I already have a good sense of what I wanted, and again, it's important to me that I build for me here. But yeah, I did speak to a lot of people in my friend group that are all language. I have some friends that are absolutely incredible, 16 languages fluently and this kind of thing. And when I speak to them about it and they say, yeah, I think that would help me, I kind of do that already in ChatGPT. So again, I don't know what they're imagining, and I still have to present something that hopefully maps to what they think I'm talking about in that conversation. So it's not really validation. It doesn't really validate it. But to your point, though, I did get some ideas from that of like, okay, the emoji thing came out of that conversation. Incidentally, I'm taking that away now. But yeah, some ideas come out of that, and it gives you a little bit of an approach that gives you a conviction. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to try this.
I think you put it really well earlier, that idea of just putting the simplest thing in front of people as soon as possible, so that you're not sort of hemming things in and kind of making all these decisions up front. You're offering to them and saying, well, look, you can kind of be part of this, and you can, I haven't got it all figured out yet. I kind of need your input. And that's just going to be more inviting to early users in terms of giving you that feedback you need,
True. And if you're doing that with the people that are potential customers, that's even more ideal, because if you really are going to produce value that doesn't exist elsewhere, then those are the same people that might buy it. And I'm actually in that position. I'm glad I'm in that position, because quite a few of the people that have bought already, LangSesh is not making a crazy revenue.
Okay, so let's move on to talking about the progress of the business itself. When did you launch? But I mean, you've probably effectively launched a few times in different sort of iterations, but what was the point at which you started charging for LangSesh?
So I launched about, I don't know a specific, I think it's about 7 weeks ago. I'd been building up until that point, but it was public about 7 weeks ago. I'd done quite a bit of testing actually internally until that point, so some people had seen it, but there was no way to pay for it, and I didn't want to launch something that didn't have a way to pay for it. Trying to avoid this eternal mistake that I've made in the past. So yes, I implemented payments. I also added referrals and voucher codes. I was insistent on that being a useful marketing strategy afterwards. Turns out no one cared about that, by the way. A perfect example of just wait for it, or do it manually until you see that there's a reason not to. And even someone that gives people that advice fell into the trap of doing the opposite, building the automated thing that in the end nobody cared about. And that delayed the launch by about 3 weeks at least. So yeah, I launched it after testing internally with a bunch of language learning friends, and then it was possible to pay for it from day one. That was about 8 weeks ago. And then yeah, from that point, there was a bunch of people that went there from where it's all driven by me. So talking about it in basically every place I can. It's funny listening to some of the other episodes actually where people talked about the same eternal problem of everything self-promotion nowadays. Like the second you even, I think people are almost at like the pre-self-promotion detection stage. It's like, I think this guy's going to talk about something he's working on, ban him now. It's hard these days to talk about stuff. which is fair. I mean, I guess there's a lot of spam and rubbish on the internet, so I understand why communities try and protect that. But it is a hard thing to get people to pay attention to anything these days. So it was all me. But that was good. There was a lot of people that went to it from all the various language communities that were already in. Some things spread out of that network as well. And then it went over the course of 8 weeks. It went from just me and a couple of people to around about 300 users. So there was quite sign-ups. And sign-ups actually in LangSesh means something because you don't have to sign up. It's an active choice that someone makes specifically because they're asked to, so they don't lose the progress. But you can continue to use the product without doing that. So yeah, about 300. And from that, there was a couple of sales, like there was about 6 sales of credits, and the cheapest credit. Someone actually bought the most expensive credit bundle, and then a couple of other people bought smaller ones. And there was about 50% overlap in that group of people who know me as well. So that's another useful thing to it doesn't really mean anything. It's very nice support, but it's not necessarily a signal of value in the purest sense of I want this, and
So you've actually only had the option to pay for about 8 weeks.
Yeah, since it was publicly available,
it was
about it. Yeah, I think it might be 8 weeks, it might be 10. I can't remember, but yeah.
Yeah, okay. And are you still on the credit-based pricing, or did you change that quite quickly?
So since then, I actually got into this incredible. It's the perfect situation, right? Like you launch something, a bunch of people use it, and then a bunch of people give you feedback. And I was very lucky to get feedback from like not everyone, but I suppose maybe 30% of the people that used it sent me an email, responded to things. I also reached out to some of those people as well, and people were very, very willing to give me feedback. Some people wrote me pages of email feedback. Incredibly useful about what they think works, what they think doesn't work, what I could do to promote it better, and all these other things. So I had a bunch of feedback, and some of it was very specific. Some of it was like, this particular exercise is not helping me, which is very small feedback, but it's useful to know that. So I basically composed a huge list of like, okay, iteration 2 work. These things all need to be right for me to present, in theory, the best thing. And of course, I have to agree with these things. You know, just because someone says that it should have this thing or not have this thing you have to assess that somewhere yourself of like, what's the vision of this thing? Do I agree with this feedback? But for the most part, the feedback was either confirming something I was doubtful about or sure about anyway. So I made this big list of work, went through it, and I was releasing as quickly. Some days I'd release 4 times. As soon as the work's there, ship it. You know, big fan of these principles of lean, all the way back from the Toyota production days of like inventory is not something we want. It doesn't make sense to build things and not ship them. Sometimes you can't ship them though, because it's half of something that's not usable. But a lot of this early work wasn't like that. It was like 3 or 4 hours of, okay, now this exercise works properly, ship it. Funny, the bottleneck then becomes, how do you tell people about this stuff? You can't be telling people 4 times a day that there's new stuff to check out. Like, there's a whole different problem of like spam. So some of that stuff people learned about much later, and I gradually talk about it a little bit more often. But yeah, and then more recently, that work was the sort of low-hanging fruit, followed by the harder things. And the harder things were these new sort of experiments, which are still very much untested, of does this pricing model work? Is this new course-based structure better, more effective? And the pricing model was changed, and that was released immediately. So you've got this weird middle ground of like, the product has a different pricing model, but it's not for the product that it's meant to be priced at yet. But it was work that was done, and if people think that they want to pay $7 a month for the current version, I can almost, in my head, I'm saying to myself, I guarantee they'll want to pay $7 for the version that's coming, because it's much better. But yeah, I shipped the pricing change as soon as I was able to do that. But it was a big change. I've gone from like, single purchase workflow to now recurring, where you have various different states you have to deal with, like people can cancel the membership on like the Stripe side, they can update the payment details, money isn't taken, how do you withdraw service at a certain point, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, ship that, and I think I'm probably about a week away from being able to ship this new update to the entire workflow, which is going to be not only a course-based structure, but it's going to focus much more on conversational learning as well. So I guess only a couple of months in the market, and quite a few things in flux in terms of pricing and also functionality. So probably still fairly early on in terms of MRR. Yeah, oh yeah, definitely. It's the very early days. Like, I don't think right now it's possible to say this is not going to go anywhere. And it's definitely also not possible to say this is definitely going to work. It's not clear yet. There's some early signals, but there needs to be much more data of people. And in the early days, it's hard because it's so hard to drive attention to these things partly the reason it's going to look like a hockey stick if it's successful is because you just have to keep building. You just have to keep saying, like, for every 100 users that I get there, how many of those people are serious language learners anyway? Even if I'm getting them from the right places, I'm reaching out to these communities, how many of them are only checking out because they're curious what I'm working on? So it's hard. You have to have enough data to really make a good decision about that. But it's very much early days.
Is there some revenue coming in at this point? The sort of early signs?
Yeah, $60, about $60 a month. So that's big for me because the attempts prior to that were nothing at all, because I wasn't thinking about how to monetize this thing. I wasn't thinking about this. This everyone talks about it, don't they? But it is a kind of a useful phrase of like an offer people can't refuse. The Alex Hormozy approach of, and I'm like, was that an offer people can't refuse? No, the credit system and the tool, and they use it once and they're like, okay, this looks nice, but how do I get? What am I supposed to do with this thing? And as much as I think as the builder that people might be able to sit down and ask themselves that question, they won't. It's almost like a sub thing. It's like they're not actually asking the question. They've got a feeling, and the feeling is, I don't really know what to do with this, and they just close it and they're gone. They never think about it again. So without that structure, I think it was not an offer people couldn't refuse. And hopefully it'll be closer to that with this one, but I have to wait for the data. It's still very much early days.
Yeah. Okay. And how are you getting new users to the product, to the site at the moment? What's your sort of main channel, as it were?
So this takes a lot of energy actually, but I'm active in a lot of different communities that are all in some way language learning communities or adjacent to them. There's so many more things I can do here. Podcast episodes is something I'd like to do more of. Writing to some degree I tried. I did a language learning newsletter for about 12 weeks. It was slow growth, and I've not got the capacity to do that properly. It grew to about 130 people. I also had like 2 other language learning products before with several thousand users. So that's a future thing. I'll reach out to those people at the right time, but not now. So there's some future ways I'm going to do that. Since the launch, it's basically been me in those communities, and that's a mixture of Mastodon, Twitter, X, Mastodon X. Even Facebook has some big language learning groups actually, so that's also been quite useful. Personal Instagram not so much, and Reddit not so much. LinkedIn not so much. Reddit's hit and miss. I think some stuff just gets immediately deleted, and once that happens a few times, I think you basically like screwed. Your account's like marked as like low karma, and no one's going to see anything you post anyway. And it's also very disproportionately useful because you have to engage a lot on those things. And I'm trying everything. I'm very open to, like, if there's a bunch of people I think I can help, then I'll try and help them. And incidentally, quite a unique one is via Esperanto, because it won't surprise you to find that many Esperanto speakers are interested in language in general and are learning another one. And there's a lot of them. And so the product supports Esperanto actually. And I've had to work specifically hard to make that possible, because LLMs, unlike every other language that they do support, don't support Esperanto perfectly. There are some edges that are not so clear because the training data is going to be much less for Esperanto content on the internet. But LangSesh does have support for Esperanto, and it works relatively well. In fact, I've even learned some random Esperanto through using my own product, which is a weird thing for me to, at this stage, run into. But through Esperanto friends, that's been helpful as well. There's a few people that I know entirely through Esperanto, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm learning Spanish or German. And there's another avenue here as well of more languages. AI can support more languages, but I'm being very conservative and not just adding like 18 languages on the site, because I want to make sure that it's mostly working properly. There are some difficulties with certain languages, ones that are written right to left, for example, ones that don't have clear word boundaries like Thai. I can't just like, some of the code is not going to work properly with those things. There's assumptions in there that is not true. So
it'd be easy to just switch all those on, but they've got to actually work well, having the experience. It's got to be right for each. And
it's really important to me that this product does not exist if it's not a good experience. That's probably true with most products, but this one especially, because the capability is being provided by AI in a significant way. The thing on top of it is the product, the experience, the structure, the choices of the exercises. In theory, you could sit down with GPT or a different model, whatever you want, and actually just say, well, I'm going to generate me a reading exercise. Now generate me another exercise that takes out 3 words and tell me whether I put them back in the right order, and then generate another exercise that breaks some words out into grammar groups, and I'll tell you which ones I think they are. I'll tell you that's a verb and that's an adjective. The product is producing that structure and those assumptions for you and productizing it into a nice UX. So it's really important that works well for me.
So let's talk a little bit about just briefly about the MVP product itself. So obviously, I appreciate it's been through sort of several iterations, and you're working on one now. But I suppose in terms of the kind of the product that you're offering up for sale for people to sign up to at the moment, how long did it take you to build that from start to finish?
So on the calendar, about 6 months. And of that, that's the best answer because there's no way to really measure it otherwise. But yeah, on the calendar, from conception of idea to literally a conversation with a few people of, AI could probably produce good reading exercises, and people buy short storybooks. So maybe we can just convert this into a product. Blah blah blah. From that point, about 6 months. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. And what? You able to share a little bit about what's under the hood in terms of the stack and frameworks, tools you're using?
Yeah, sure. It's a good question actually, because I sometimes mention this and I don't think non-engineers really get it, but it's really important when you go down this route of saying, I want to build my own value in the world. I want to produce something that I'm proud of and want to work on. This is really important because if you just cut all the corners, and I do think this whole vibe coding nonsense is going to produce a lot of this, that people are going to get a really nice fast start and then they're going to lose all hope because it's going to be an absolute pile of crap. And who wants to work on that? Nobody wants to work on that. And as engineers, we've all done that plenty of times. We've taken a job at a company and realized it's in a big mess. And, engineers like greenfield projects for a reason, because everything's nice and clean and all the possibilities are wide open and we can make all these cool choices that are definitely going to be right and we definitely won't regret them and all this kind of stuff. But so for me, the tech stack is really important and it's very simple. So another guiding principle I could say on this question is just keep it very, very simple, because I always remind myself of the Lindy principle. And if people don't know what I'm talking about, the Lindy principle is just this idea that if something's been around for 10 years, it's much more likely to be around for 10 years. And really what that means is if something's only been around for 1, then you should probably take it with a bit more of a risk thing. I was like, maybe it'll be around 10, but it's not clear. React in year 1, everyone hated it. People were like, React is a terrible thing. It mixes data and structure and behavior all together into one thing. We don't do that. We can separate them. This is a terrible idea. And now, that's completely different, because you're like, React is definitely going to be around for another 10 years. Might not be the most popular choice in 10 years, but it'll still be here. So with a tech stack for LangSesh, it was important that I was choosing boring technology, as people like to call it, from the infamous post by Dan such and such. So LangSesh it's React, but it's actually Preact. So anyone that knows about that world, the Preact is just a very minimal version of React without some of the other features that I don't care about. I don't care about server components, and I don't care about half the other things in there. I only want to use it as a transformation from state to visual parts. So I use Preact because that way it's much smaller. I can bundle it together, and the entire workflow is very simple. I don't need to do complex things like chunking it because I've got this huge framework bundled in there. LangSesh is a single page application though, and I think that's important because I'm focused very much on the UX here. I want things to be snappy and fast. So yeah, the architecture generally is SPA, and it's very simple. It talks to a backend that's written in Go, and it does so over HTTP, and it doesn't even do it over any kind of REST thing. It actually uses a custom library that I worked on a few years ago that to simplify and not entirely accurately summarize it, it's a simple version of GraphQL. It's basically like an RPC thing. So it's like, just call this thing on the back end, do a thing, do a task, give me a result. That's all it does. It doesn't even yet batch them. That was the idea, that it would be some minimal version of GraphQL and that it could at least batch those things. But it doesn't even do that because it doesn't need to right now. So it's very simple. Go back end, that's on a virtual host. It doesn't need to be expensive. It can probably serve, I would say it could serve so much more than it does now, maybe 100 times the traffic that it currently serves without even upgrading the server, and that's $10 a month. So it does not need to be complex. The deployment process and the provision is also simple. It's a series of bash scripts. This literally sounds like something from history, but bash is a pretty useful thing, and it works well. And a friend and I years ago made a bunch of bash libraries that you can import into new bash scripts that produces a Ruby-like kind of language, which is basically just a bunch of conventions of how to take something from one machine, cross-compile it, and then via SCP and SSH provision and deploy those things provision a new machine and then deploy the application onto them. So it's agentless. So it's really simple, and it's using technology that's been around. Again, if you're talking about Lindy, those things have been around for a long time, right? Since like the 70s. Yeah. So I can deploy the thing from anywhere. It's not even deployed from a GitHub pipeline because it doesn't need to be. It's deployed from my machine because it's SSH and perfectly secure to do it that way. So yeah, really simple. That's literally the whole thing. It's like we've got the front end, the back end. Back end's Go. Front end is TypeScript, by the way. I didn't mention that, but I've been writing JavaScript since day one. Well, maybe not day one. 95, and no, I was 9. So I wasn't writing since I was 9, but I was writing it since very, very early days, back when JavaScript was actually a huge mess, more than it is now. And I do like JavaScript, but the truth is any large project benefits hugely from some additional structure on top that you do not get. Yeah. I worked on a code base that was over 100,000 lines of JavaScript actually about 7, 8 years ago, and it became horrendously difficult to manage most things with that, even with a good test script.
I remember my first experience of JavaScript, just knocking out a basic HTML site, and it was just to do image rollovers. Remember? Yeah. Just getting the thing where you hover. You obviously do it in CSS now, just where you hover over a button, and it changes. The color hover over an image, and it swaps it for another image, and that was pretty much the extent to which we used JavaScript in the beginning. Yeah. And now look where we are.
I remember we used to call it something different. I mean, we called it DHTML back then. It was like dynamic HTML. It wasn't an app at all. It was HTML that kind of moves or responds in some way. And it's crazy. We still basically build on all that technology now. We just have a bunch of frameworks and pretend that we know what we're doing now.
That's pretty much it. Great. We've covered a lot of ground. I think let's move into just summarising, if you can, a few wins and learnings, just picking out a few things from your story. So if we could start with, I know we've probably talked around this a lot, but just to distill it a little bit. Excuse me. Yeah, just to distill it a little bit. Could you pick out one thing in particular that worked really well so far in this journey with LangSesh?
For me, I would say what's worked really well is me taking responsibility for the fact that I don't know the answer. And the best way to get it is by asking people. In the past, I've just not done, I mean, it's safe to say I've basically not done it at all because I've done it so infrequently. Of just reaching out to people and saying, what do you think of this? How can it be better? In particular, I even encourage people to give me bad feedback. I'm like, tell me why you hate it. Tell me what it is, just absolutely sucks at, and the reason you definitely won't pay for it, because it completely disarms the whole thing. I'm not asking, and it also is like, I'm not looking for you to say nice things. I just want you to be honest. And the chances are you probably don't like it, as opposed to do like it. If I let you don't like it, if I enable that in the conversation. So what's gone well is I've said to myself, listen, no one cares about this more than you do. And no one really cares about it at all outside of you. So there's no reason not to just ask people. They're going to tell you, and they're not going to feel too bad being honest, and you're going to learn a lot from it. And as much as I'm a dog fooding this thing because I'm also a language learner as well and love language, that doesn't mean I have all the right answers for sure. I have certain ideas, I have certain theories, and at the end of the day, I can build all of this stuff like I've done in the past many times, spend a lot of time doing that, a lot of energy doing that, put it out there, and maybe learn the answer based on whether people use it. But it's just so much more effective to be like, put a simple thing out there and then ask people about it. So I'd say what's gone well is I've done a lot more of that, and it has definitely revealed again and again all little things that I either hadn't thought about or agreed with, but now it produced an absolute conviction that I was right, and then I should act on it. So in summary and to simplify, talking to users a lot more.
Yeah, that's exactly it. You ask people for their opinion, but as you say, it's so powerful if you can disarm them and get them to flip into that mode where they're actually going to feel comfortable with giving you their honest opinion. So like, don't sugarcoat it. Really don't. You'd be wasting my time if you tell me that it's great and I go off and build this thing and actually you were just saying what I wanted to hear. There's no point.
I have a friend actually that's sorry to interject there. I have a friend who's particularly good at that, and he reminds me again and again that I need to really embrace and just copy his style. Of like we have a good relationship. We've worked together for a long time, and he will just tell me straight. He'll be like, "This isn't working. This is a bad idea," and that's okay. That doesn't mean he's right. It doesn't mean I'm right, but it's new information, and if he really believes that, then that's useful to know. So at this point, and he asks me sometimes for my advice, and he'll say the same thing. He'll say, tell me your honest opinion as though you were aiming to make me cry. And it sounds silly, it sounds like a little bit exaggerated, but it does, because it's so easy to go the other way and say, I'm going to try and be nice here, or I don't want to be a bad person or a nasty person, because that's our default most of the time for good people. Most people are good people. It's sometimes useful to swing so far the other way and say, try and make me cry. And then maybe you land in the middle somewhere and you give really nice, honest feedback that just says what you actually think.
Yes, yeah. But at the same time, putting it that way, you can also kind of have a sense of humor about it, can't you? It's like sort of roast my idea, you know what I mean? And if you can find a way to like legitimately roast it, then well, you know, fair enough. There's probably a problem with it. But also, I think it's important to should be obvious really, but try and ask the opinions of you know, people who might actually be your users at the end of the day, rather than you just ask a friend or family or whatever. And you know, even then you ask them to say, well, you know, don't sugarcoat it, and they might not, but what do they really know? And they might tell you it's rubbish, and actually they're wrong because they're not, you know, they're not your users. So
that's very true.
Yeah. Something within all that. Great. So now one thing, there are probably one or two things you've already mentioned. One thing that didn't go well, maybe we'd call it a failure, and what you learned from that.
I think probably what's not gone well, it's very early days, right? So I don't think there's any like major thing of like, oh damn, I really screwed up here. And I've tried to address some of the things I've made mistakes with in the past, and those are really good answers to that question. Again, with hindsight, you can find those nice answers. But I would say that one thing that hasn't gone well, and I think it's pretty typical actually at this stage, is you know, you care about the product a lot, and you think this is going to be cool, and I've built this thing, and there's a lot of energy and, you know, sleepless nights and stressful moments that got into making this thing real, and it now works pretty well. But people don't care about it, and that's fine. That's completely reasonable, and you should never have any resentment about that. And it's a pretty typical story of like, you know, I think I'm trying to hold on to this belief and remind myself of the why, and at the same time acknowledge that it's not perfect yet. Meanwhile, people are coming and going. They're literally coming into that, using it once or twice and dropping off. And even though I've got a nice theory right now of why, I still don't know for sure. I think what's gone not well is just, you know, it's not been a runaway success. But that's kind of what I expected. So I don't think that's necessarily going badly. It's sort of going just exactly how you'd expect, which is you've not quite found market fit yet. If you had, you know, these people would be paying immediately and staying. They're not. But that's good though, because now you're learning something from it. You know, they're using it a little bit, and then they're not staying. So I'd say, yeah, for me, stickiness in the product is not right yet. That's not gone well, or maybe it's gone as well as I would have been expected at this stage. But there's a lot of improvement required there still. So that's really where my attention is on. If I reframe the question as, you know, what do you really still need to get right? That is what I still need to get right. The overall value proposition, which I think is a combination of pricing and structured approach here as well. Yep.
So actually, you know, the other thing I was going to ask is one thing you're figuring out now, but I think realistically there is no failure yet, because you're so early on, and actually you're figuring all these things out, the pricing and getting the product right. Okay, well, tons of insights there, and it's really interesting to kind of learn about the kind of the broader story behind LangSesh and sort of how you got here. I mean, I suppose in terms of the kind of future that you sort of have in mind, I know you sort of feel like it's unwritten, as it were. But is this kind of, do you hope that this product might develop to be kind of the one for a good period of time, or is this kind of, maybe you're thinking there's going to be sort of portfolio related products? What's your vision there?
Yeah, it's a good question actually. The current plan actually is to continue on this thing. I think this needs a year of it being in a state where I'm fairly convinced that it provides value, because it does to me personally, and build more. Well, not really build, just get better at telling people about it. You know, this is skills that, you know, at my core, I'm an engineer. So on the marketing side of things, and knowing how to promote this, there's a lot of things there I have ideas about, but don't know if they're going to work, and I need time to do that. So yeah, for the next year, my focus will absolutely be on this thing. And I think one way or another, this can become a useful product. I'm hoping at a price point that makes it sustainable. And again, in my case, I had a great conversation with someone a few days ago, and they said to me, this question of like, you know, if you fill out a YC application, one of the questions on there is like, what is your individual competitive advantage? And that's such a difficult question, because the truth is most people will answer that with some attempt to convince the reader of the application that it's true, when they probably don't believe it, because it's really hard to actually truly believe that you have some kind of unfair advantage. Like, what unfair advantage do I actually have, honestly? But one answer that a friend gave me is a really interesting one, and it stays with me now, is he says, I'm small. Most people want to be big. Most people want to take on a seed round, maybe the first big round. Most people want to reach 10K MRR. The truth is 1K MRR, and I'll be working on this thing permanently. So I can offer this thing at 10 times less risk than someone else offering it that isn't yet at their MRR. It's a weird answer to the question. Most people wouldn't say that, but I'm interested in this. I like the tech stack. I like the problem domain. I like the current incarnation of the solution. If that becomes sustainable, It doesn't need to be a big company that hires 10 people and maybe at some point buys me a yacht. I don't care about any of those things. I just care about working in this domain. And that is an unfair advantage because most people are just distracted by the money side of things. If I cared about money, I'd go back to the corporate job, which will always make me a lot more money than this world will. So yeah, I think that's, for that reason, I think I can stay in this game for long enough to know that, to see it work, or to be fairly convinced that, fine, I just haven't found product market fit with this thing. Both of those outcomes are definitely possible. And then in the meantime, I'm experimenting with another idea, and I've not done very much on it right now because it was too much of a distraction at this stage, but I'm going to start opening up a bit of a private community for people in my environment that are doing the same thing, that are on their solo journey, feeling a bit lonely, feeling like they need conversations like this conversation, and many conversations I have with friends where really it's to bond, to soundboard, to share ideas, and to really just make new friends. I think as adults, especially in like our age demographic, there's a lot of people doing things, but not a lot of guys like get together and share that experience and learn from each other, and we can learn a lot from each other. So I'm experimenting with a community called Build Mode for people that consider themselves in some form of build mode, but I'm nowhere near anything that's viable or interesting at this stage with that idea. So I'm intentionally ignoring it because I need to get LangSesh to a good point before I even consider it. Shiny object syndrome.
So it's not a community anyone can go and join just yet?
No, not yet. But if you are listening to this and you're interested, please reach out and let me know if you think it's a good idea, and that would be helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah, great. Okay, brilliant. Right, well, let's move towards wrapping up. So yes, we talked about this a little bit before the call. Do you have a tip or a message for, you've already shared a ton of tips and insights, but kind of perhaps a new one for a would-be founder who's thinking about building something, starting something, and just can't quite figure out maybe if they've got what it takes or how to go about it?
That's a really good question, honestly. I think there's so many ways to tackle that question. For me, I have this kind of default of like any question that seems difficult, I sort of like devolve into philosophy and start thinking about it from the angle of like, what's the real meaning here? At the end of the day, look, we've not got long on this planet, don't waste it. That's really probably my advice is like, don't waste it. But that's not very helpful because, what does waste it even mean? Like, how do I know I'm wasting it? I have a friend, and on this island that I'm living on right now in Thailand, actually, there's many people like this, very spiritual people, very hippie people. Whether that's good or bad, no comment. It's just different. But people on this island are very present, maybe too present. Too intentionally present. But it's nice for the contrast because in the corporate grind, you have the opposite. People just don't even realize they're sacrificing their entire 20s to work on something that basically statistically has very little chance of working. So my advice would probably be that is like just go back to the question of like what do you really want out of life? Because building a startup now, it's always been hard. I would say in some ways it's harder now than ever because we're in this point where, the economy's harder. It's harder to have that disposable income that enables you to do that with, the state of our industry at this point. There's a lot of uncertainty about what AI will swallow, what AI companies themselves will swallow, where the opportunity lies. It's not to say people can't be successful. Absolutely they can, but it's not going to be by accident in most cases. You're going to have to really work hard. The 10-year overnight success is still a thing. And if you're not prepared to be in it for 10 years, you're probably not going to get the overnight success. It might come in year 1, might come in year 2, but it might come in year 9. I know people that literally worked on a company for 9 years before they sold it. So my advice would be that is just ask yourself, do you really want to do this? Or are you being trapped by fashion? Are you basically doing the equivalent of thinking that you want a Ferrari or you want that really expensive bag or the really nice suit, when actually what you want to do is put some swim shorts on, go move to a cheap island and actually make some really good friends and have a great time and enjoy your 20s and not waste it building something that probably won't work. Like, that is intentionally meant to sound slightly cynical because sometimes people don't ask themselves that question. And I've spent a long time building stuff that no one even knows about now. It's not currently available. It's long since deleted from the internet. I don't regret those moments, but I probably should have asked myself a few more times, do I really want to work? Do I want to work on this idea? Does it excite me? Another piece of adjacent advice is don't work on problems that you don't care about. Just don't do it. Even if you think that you might make a lot of money off it, statistically you won't. But you won't even enjoy the experience, and you probably won't learn anything that you find particularly useful. Don't work in domains that you're not interested in.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because you hear this advice a lot. Just like pick a boring problem, and I always think, I don't know about that. And obviously, what's boring is subjective, and it's like, I think it's more about pick maybe a kind of a less obvious problem, a kind of maybe an underserved area, but it needs to be interesting to you. It might be boring to other people. But it's not like this idea of like, let me just go and find the most boring thing because that's what I'm supposed to do because no one else will do it. And, because you'll just get you'll get bored and you won't see it through. So
exactly. Like you got to, when you say like, most people's advice about like how do you stay motivated is you keep going back to this why. Well, if your why is I think I can make a bit of money off this, well, you can objectively make a bit of money off other things much more surely. So you haven't even got a good why at that point. So like there's no point in doing that. You think you're scalping, but you're not. You're playing like intraday trading with algorithms that you're going to lose. That's pretty much what you're doing if you just pick any old problem that you don't care about. But on the other hand, if you pick a problem you care about, it won't really matter to you much what your MRR is. If you can keep doing it, you can keep doing it, and you're going to enjoy your life. I know a guy that builds a network for retired NFL players in the US to do that in Europe, and he makes great money from it, and he just loves what he does, and no one cares except him and a small number of people. And that, to me, that's the goal. It's not like, it's not to reach the point where I can piss off every resident of Venice because I have a big lush wedding there. I'm referring to Bezos at the moment. Who wants that money? Who wants to be that famous and powerful? I mean, maybe some people do, but for me, I just think it's about making the most of your time. Because time is the thing that you're going to sacrifice, and also health. There's definitely the whole grind of like, just if you're not working 60 hours, someone else is, and they're going to outcompete you. Well, then let them, because they're sacrificing something that's a lot more valuable than whatever they're going to get for it, because they're going to be like 40 years old, they're going to be like out of shape, probably some kind of like big health problem. It's not worth it. So that's my advice, is like, think about the other side enough, and if you do, and you say, no, look, I am actually really excited about this, and I want to work in this space, I want to create my own path and freedom in the world. Great. Now you've got some useful things to think about. Maybe you can pull some different levers like I did and say, well, I can kind of mostly do that actually if I just don't spend as much. Maybe I don't want the car then, because that means I could work on this problem.
That's brilliant. Right, let's bring things to a close. So I'll get a few links into the show notes. Obviously, I'll get the LangSesh URL in there. And you mentioned, if anyone wanted to kind of reach out to you, if they've got any questions, what's the best way to do that these days?
So the best way to contact me is my full name, which is martinrue, rue.com. On the top of that page, there's a bunch of links to the various different social places you can find me. Of course, LinkedIn as well. And my email address is also linked there. So you can reach me by whichever poison you've chosen to spend your free time. Perfect. Right. I'll get the link to your, because you've got a kind of small blog on there, haven't you, where you post some thoughts? Yeah, I used to write more on there, but these days I feel like nobody reads blogs anymore, so I tend to just post those things on LinkedIn. But there's a little blog there. There's some very old articles of funny coding stories if anyone's interested in that stuff. Great. All right, I'll put that in the links as well. And brilliant, Martin. It's been an absolute pleasure. Really enjoyed it. It has. Thanks for inviting me, Rob, and thanks for the conversation. I had a strong feeling this was going to be a good one because of our interactions on LinkedIn. And I've really enjoyed the previous episodes as well, by the way. So this is it's an exciting new podcast, and it's definitely on my podcast list. So thanks for starting this, and thanks for the invite. Thanks, Martin. All right, see you around. Cheers. Cheers. Bye. Bye.